Question. What is the difference between sliding up and down the scale of the 144 levels of consciousness and making a determined permanent advancement forward? I hope this question is clear. Well, the way I see it is that you have two ways for people to shift in consciousness, whether it's up or down. There's a conscious, determined way, and there's an unconscious way. And so this is how I would approach the question. So you have, I've talked about how there are 144 possible levels of consciousness on Earth. A new being starts at the 48th level. It has a certain sense of being connected to something outside its own mind, its higher self basically. And it has two options. It can expand its sense of connection, become more and more connected, or it can go into what I call separation, where it loses its connection and sees itself as a separate being. And what happens to many beings in the beginning when they're new is, and most people who are in embodiment right now are not new beings, by the way, they've been in embodiment many times, both on this and other planets. But anyway, a new being is that it might make certain choices to expand its sense of connection, therefore go above the 48th level, but it's not really conscious of what it's doing. It's not really deliberately making that choice. It's just sort of, responding to the situations it encounters on Earth in such a way that it expands its sense of connection. Basically, you can say that about the 48th level, you are aware of the golden rule: don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. So if you make choices based on that, you will gradually rise without necessarily being aware of it. There are also beings who go into separation and they're not really conscious of it. I mean, I don't think, as far as I understand it, that anybody has ever said, oh yeah, I'm deliberately choosing to go into separation. Because it doesn't seem at the 48th level like going to the 47th is such a big decisive step. So people just sort of can do it out of curiosity or without really being aware of what it means. And then they can keep sliding down gradually to certain lower levels. But if you keep sliding gradually, you'll never reach the lowest level of consciousness, because you'll never go into this being willing to deliberately harm other people. But there are, of course, people you can see, for example, let's take a situation like Nazi Germany. There were people who they were certainly in separation. And when they were given a position in the Nazi hierarchy, whether in the SS or wherever, they certainly started sliding to lower levels of consciousness. But they weren't really even consciously deciding this. But then there were some beings that were in the fallen consciousness, and when they were given the opportunity to exercise power, and this is, of course, didn't only happen in Nazi Germany, it happens everywhere. There are many beings, when they are given an opportunity to exercise power, they make this, I want power, I want it as much as possible, and they deliberately slide down, because in order to have the greatest amount of power, you have to go to the lowest levels of consciousness. And being the most selfish and self-centered, be willing to do whatever it takes to get power and to defend it. So there is, in other words, there are beings that can come to such a low level that they deliberately decide they want the power, and therefore they make a determined slide downwards. So now you can have a scenario where there's a person who hasn't done that. They haven't gone into this, what we could call being evil. But they have slid somewhat down. But now they become influenced by this idea that you find in most religions. Don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. And you start seeing the value of that, and then you gradually start sliding up again. So you may have a being who gradually, without realizing it, reaches the 48th level, goes beyond, and is gradually moving higher. Many people on Earth are at that level. You see, for example, I grew up in Denmark, which is a democratic country, and most people in Denmark, they are not outwardly Christians. They might have been baptized in the state church, but they don't go to church, they don't see themselves as Christians. But they are following the golden rule. They would never dream of harming other people. Most of the people I grew up with were like that. And so they are gradually sliding upwards because they are making unselfish choices, and they are quite willing to help other people, and they are quite aware of society and their responsibility to in a democratic society. And so this is growing. But then you can have a person who comes to a more conscious awareness, and it can happen. It can happen at the 48th. For many people, it happens somewhat above the 48th, but not near the 96th level. But they can come to an awareness that, oh, there's a spiritual path. There is a potential of raising my consciousness by doing something deliberately and consciously. And so that's when you go into what the question says, making a determined permanent advancement forward. So to me, the determined permanent advancement is when you are conscious, number one. It is possible to reach higher levels of consciousness than what I have right now. There's a systematic process for doing this, and I am willing to engage in that process. That's when you make a very determined. And then you can, when you get to that point, you can very quickly move towards the 96th level. The Masters have given many tools for this. They've even given a whole series of books called the Path to Self-Mastery series, where they take you from the 48th level through the various initiations up to the 96th level. But as the Masters have also explained, there is a dramatic shift at the 96th level, because now you have to really let go of this focus on the self-centeredness, and your sense of connection becomes so strong that you feel that you are connected to what I call the one mind, or the Christ mind, or the Buddha nature, but so is everybody else. And therefore you are not seeking to raise yourself up comparison to others, you are actually seeking to raise the whole. And so that's another very determined shift that comes in, where you're not just focused on your own growth. And it's perfectly legitimate to be focused on your own growth from the 48th to the 96th level. But in order to go beyond the 96th level, you have to stop being focused on your own growth and focused on raising the whole, helping other people. And so this is how I would understand it. You can, without being consciously aware of what's happening, slide downwards or upwards within a certain range. But by doing this, you never get to the lowest levels of consciousness, and you never get to the really close to the 96th level. And then when you discover the spiritual path consciously, that's when you can make a very determined effort. And even if you discover it below this 96th level, you can fairly quickly rise to the 96th, and then if you make that shift there, you can go beyond it and go into a whole different level of the path, where you are much more aware of the underlying oneness behind the world of form and behind all different beings.